Hi guys, welcome back. So the mad chicken target that we built in the last video, he got his own back on us last week. We actually took a ricochet to the face of the GoPro and it smashed this lens on the front here. Now luckily it turns out that's just a replaceable cover, so we're all back in order now, but it meant I didn't have anything to film on downrange last week. So we're back in order again today. We have got the H&N slugs today, so we haven't used H&N slugs before on the channel, and I've picked these ones. They're a 13 grain 177, so these are specifically designed for rifles over 12 foot-pounds, so 16 joules as a minimum. The reason I've chosen the heavier weight ones is, hopefully you can tell there, they're a little bit longer. I'm going to put a comparison picture up between some of the 10 grains, but we've got this additional length in the rear section here, which means we've also got a larger bearing surface at the back here. I'm hoping that that will mean that these load with less errors, they get less distorted and go into the barrels just that little bit more concentrically, so hopefully that can rule out some of the variables. I'm also very curious as to how much additional drag we're going to get in the barrel with this even larger section. So I'm going to get everything set up and I will see you at the farm. Right then guys, we're here. So we've got the 13 grain slugs, we've got the Anschutz 9015 to start with. Now this is an interesting one. The reason I'm going to use this first is the loading arrangement on here. I'm loading these slugs directly into the barrel itself, directly into the rifling, so I can feel immediately if there's any difference in size or anything like that. If there's any inconsistencies in the actual manufacture of the slugs, I better feel that straight away. So it just saves a bit of time sort of using a pellet gauge or something like that. For the sake of testing that we're going to be doing today, we're going to run them straight out with just under 25 yards. Target is down there. One side of the card I'll use for the 9015, the other side I'll use for the XTI. We'll start with this one. I can zoom myself back in. The sun's out around the corner, it's beautiful in the sun. It's actually quite cold around here, so we're going to get the shooting done. I have noticed, which is quite interesting, this is the first time I've noticed it with any of the H&Ns, these appear to have some sort of coating on them in the tin, so whether that's a proprietary coating they put on at factory, I don't know, but I'm going to get the GoPro on and we'll get a few shots off, see how they run, shall we? Right then, GoPro's on. Yes, I know I need a haircut and a beard trim. It's been the winter. I'll get shorn when the sheep do. Right, a lot of you have been asking about the setup here. This is just a wobbly, it's a Ketar plastic work table. The legs actually sort of unscrew and clip underneath a bit, but it's not that stable, but it's stable enough for this testing. That is just an Amazon. It's one of their cheapest little bench rest bags, and it's now filled with silica cat litter. It seems to be working quite well. I could probably do with actually topping it up a little bit, but it's pretty stable for what we need at the moment. Anschutz glove. Main reason for the glove is just, as I've got that now rested on my left hand, it cuts down the pulse, so it just helps to steady that aim off a little bit. So let's see if these actually work. Now the slugs that we've used so far, we've used a lot of different brands, but they've all been around 10 grains. So largely the same weight as the JSB heavies. That's actually slid in there quite nicely, quite firm to go in, but not too tight. Both of the rifles are set up to run JSB heavies at 710 feet per second, and they're both zeroed for that as well now. So just bring that back onto its zero stop. Right, so the very top right we're aiming for. Right, okay, so we're almost an additional mil dot of drop at just under 25 yards over a JSB heavy, which, to be honest, you can just readjust your scope. That's not a big problem. I've used 13 grain pellets. We've used the QYS Magnums. They were a 13 grain Diablo with a semi-pointed head, and they hit really hard. They were pretty good. Every time we've shot slugs after a barrel that's been leaded in with JSB pellets, heavies in this case, the first couple have been absolutely bang on, and then they've started to scatter all over the place. So I wonder if that will happen again. Any ideas where that went? Has that literally gone through the same hole? I don't know. We'll have to review the GoPro footage for that one. We'll find out again. So if previous experience is anything to go by, after a couple of shots on a barrel pre-leaded with JSBs, these may start to open up a tiny bit and then start re-leading into the H&N lead that they use. Now these actually look a bit sort of lighter in colour than their pellets do, so they might well be a softer makeup, more of a high lead content than their pellets are. Interestingly, I think I pulled that one a little bit, but that probably means then that second one went straight through the same hole as the first one. Before we go, I'll chrono this and it'll give us a good idea of how much less power they're making than an equivalent weighted Diablo pellet. Oh, that's quite encouraging. Okay, just going to move over onto the next target to left. I'll tell you what I'm going to do actually, I'm going to bring that up. We're about a mil dot down, so if I give that 10 clicks of elevation, let's see whether or not. Let's go to the target just to the left of the one I've just shot, see if we're anywhere near the actual red circle itself. Closer. That one felt a little bit tighter to load in the barrel, and I can feel that there is some sort of waxy, some sort of coating on there. I can feel it on my fingertips. Well, that one was bang on. The shot cycle on this doesn't actually deal with the heavier slugs and pellets particularly well. There's a slight bit of movement on the firing. Of course, the stabiliser system that's built into this is designed primarily for indoor shooting, flathead pellets at 10 metres, and they're generally, well, pretty much half the weight, in fact, of what these slugs are. It's a tension modified 9015. It's been working quite well, but it does struggle a little bit with this heavier ammo. The XTI though, that does seem to cope with the heavier pellets and slugs that bit better. But at the lighter end, there's a marginal difference. Well, that's the first one that's moved over a little bit. Maybe now the remnants of the JSB lead has cleared and they're starting to lead themselves in a bit now. Seems to be quite common when you swap between pellets and slugs. Well, not horrific. The little circle in the middle, them red circles, they are just under 1 centimetre across. So there's only a little gentle breeze running today. Obviously that one felt quite tight. I wonder if that one's going to skew off. There's only a gentle breeze, not really a big effect on the groups downrange. We are very much sheltered here. The wind does swirl over the top. It's actually running right up my back at the moment, but won't make a big difference at this sort of range. The big old grey cloud rolling over. Right down the centre line. Okay, so we can assume that the scope is somewhere about zeroed now. So let's see if we can take the middle out of one of these red circles then, shall we? Be nice if we can just keep a consistent group all within them little red circles. That would be pretty good. That'll mean we can come back to these once the fields dry out a little bit. We can push the ranges out a little bit. Now, a lot of you I know are going to ask, why bother with all the slugs? Why do all the testing? Well, the first thing is it's just a bit of fun, but ballistically speaking, these are better than a Diablo type of pellet. However, especially in the lower power rifles, in the smaller calibers, getting these up to the speeds that they appear to want and actually getting them loaded concentrically in the barrel, all of these other external factors in making them work properly, it's quite an engineering challenge, and I'm enjoying sort of working through it, trying to close up the sort of the speeds, if you like, between a JSB heavy and a 10 grain slug. The slugs will generally be somewhere in the region of 30 to 40 feet per second slower at the muzzle. There's a few little tricks that I've been doing to close that gap up, so I can effectively keep these running at a slightly higher speed whilst keeping the rifle legal with a heavy traditional pellet. So there's a lot of things that I'm interested in. It's all quite nerdy little experimenting, really. Are they going to take over pellets for sub 12 stuff? Probably not, to be honest. But if you want to push the ranges out, and when everything does go to plan, we've used we've used most of the slugs on the market now. There's a few that we haven't, a few really expensive odd ones, but we had the Mako slugs early last year, this time last year. They suited this barrel perfectly. They went really, really well, and in the wind, they were absolutely fantastic. They were really easy to judge, and I was getting about half the wind drift and significantly less drop than I would have done with a JSB heavy at the same range. But the next batch weren't that much cop. There was a difference in size in the second or third batches, I think it was, that we had. There was quite a variation in the size. You could feel them loading. They weren't as consistent as the first one. So I have seen personally, and I've got it on film, that when everything goes right and they fit your barrel nicely, they load concentrically in the bore, there's definitely some sort of performance gain there, but there's so many external factors that can stop that from happening. It's just good fun. Are they going to take over pellets? I don't know, but these look pretty good to start with, so let's carry on running these groups off and see how we do. Little 5-shot group, that's under ½ an inch, so that's outside edge to outside edge, so it's certainly not great. Would certainly be humane at this sort of range for sort of pest control duties. We'll carry on and get a few more off and see whether they tighten up a little bit, but they're not as bad as some of the slugs that we've had, and actually better than a lot of the budget pellets that we've tried. If we can get a tight little cloverleaf group like that with them, then they'll definitely be a contender to push out to the extended ranges, and then we can try them in some calm conditions, and then we'll get them out in some real wind, see what sort of drifts and drops we get. It's funny, you seem to get one that just skews over to the right a little bit. I can feel it now on the old thumb. You can probably see on the end there now, I've got a nice little imprint of the skirts there. When we do our new barrel builds, I'm going to open up the lead-ins on them a little bit more to suit some of the harder pellets. Right, not too bad, not brilliant, but I've certainly seen worse. Let's go and have a quick look at those, shall we? Right, so not amazing, but certainly not terrible. This is where we started. Now these squares are actually 5.5 millimeters, so they're the same size as a 2.2 pellet. That circle in the middle is just under 1 centimetre across, so we've got under a half an inch. You can see they've sort of marginally tightened up a little bit, the odd little flyer, but overall not really that bad. Not great, certainly nowhere near what we could do with a, well, to be honest, any of the H&M B8s and things like that. We've stacked them sort of inside one little circle, but yeah, as slugs go, through a fairly non-optimised barrel, for a non-optimised 9015, not too bad, but they'll certainly give us a baseline now for when the fields dry out. We can push these out and we can monitor the drifts and the drops, because we've got quite a lot of data now on the JSB heavies, all my holdovers of the extended ranges, so we can directly compare them through the same guns. So I'm going to set up the XTI now. We'll get some of them run off again and we'll see whether or not that does any better or any worse. Right then, swapped over to the XTI now. This has got a more traditional probe loading affair, so of course I'm pushing the slug into the back of the barrel, but we have got an O-ring in the barrel there and a transfer port that it's got to jump over before the probe itself seats it snugly into the rifling. So there's more things that slug's got to navigate before it's in the rifling. That in theory could mean that there's more chance of it ending up in the rifling, slightly on the piss, a little bit canted, whatever you want to call it, a bit misaligned. So we'll see how it goes. Of course, I wanted to use the 9015 first because I can feel that with my thumb. You can probably see, not so much now, but you could actually see a mark on there. They were getting quite stiff to push into the 9015 barrel, but with the XTI here, the probe will seat them into the rifling, and away we go. We've got just enough air in there, I think, to get off, cut the small groups, so let's do it. Okay, so the left side of the card, we're going to use the XTI. As you can see here, I've got the little wind indicator stick out now, so hopefully we'll be able to see what the wind is doing. Let's have a little go. Hopefully the GoPro stays intact today. See, what I have noticed actually, it's quite awkward to load slugs into this barrel. You've got slightly more space on the 9015. It doesn't have the probe in the way, and because of the shape of the slugs, they just seem a little bit fiddly for me to load, but once they're in the barrel. Okay, so considering that's jumped over a barrel O-ring and a transfer port and is now seated in the rifling, that felt pretty good. And again, this is also zeroed up for JSB heavies, so we should find that they come in a little bit low. Let's have a look, see how it goes. That's way off and low. And now there's someone out with a bloody chainsaw. Okay, so the point of impact is wildly different to the JSB heavies, but there's probably, only a slug's gap between those two? You definitely won't be able to tell on camera, but I can certainly tell this end that the actual muzzle report is different with these heavier slugs on this. Of course, I've got the airstrip on it, which is diverting the blast away as it leaves the barrel, but I can tell that it's definitely struggling to get them down the barrel. It certainly feels and sounds slightly different to a normal pellet. Let's give that a few clicks, shall we? See if we can bring that a little bit nearer to the little red circle. We're going to go again at that top left one. Now, I wasn't going to try these longer slugs, but the main thing that I really wanted, and the reason we're doing this test actually, is just to see whether extending the length of it, so the rear section of it is the part that keeps it concentric into the bore. That really is the bit that is problematic on some of the slugs. The little Zans, for instance, and the Mako slugs, they have got quite a long sort of taper to the point, if you like, so they've got a very small bearing surface at the back. Now that's great because it reduces the friction in the barrel, but it also means that they can then go into the barrel misaligned, which of course, if there's any yaw on that slug before it's even out the barrel, it's going to be all over the place. So hopefully this may well mean that these are worth trying a bit further out. And skewed off a little bit. Don't forget, I haven't brought it back left on the windage, so they're all going to come in slightly to the right of the target. Yeah, I can feel that waxy sort of coating on my fingertips now. Okay, so that has tightened up quite a bit. Let's see if we can take the middle out of that red circle then, shall we? Just a weird random low one. So every so often you will stamp a few through the pretty much exact same hole. They do seem to be wandering around a little bit. Now of course, working within a power limit, these guns, they both run at 710 feet per second for about 11.5 foot-pounds. with JSB heavies. Now they, in 177, are pretty much the most efficient pellet, so it gives me a bit of margin for error. When it gets hotter, obviously the rifles will speed up a little bit, so it's a pretty safe area to be. These will definitely be leaving the barrel slower, they'll be leaving the muzzle slower, so of course they'll be making less power, but what we really want to know is how much slower they are when you do a direct comparison between equally weighted pellets. That's the really important thing to know, because when we've done the 10 grain testing, so with the, well, all of the other slugs we've done have been 10 grains first, and the JSB heavies, there's normally 30 to 40 feet per second slower with the slugs. Do these stack up? Has that larger rear section created more drag in the barrel, and has it slowed them down comparatively more? Be interesting to find out. That's what I'm after, that's what I'm hoping to accomplish today. These are getting quite slippery, they're quite hard to hold on to at the moment. Ooh, maybe they are bedding in quite nicely. You watch now, I've said that, this one will probably skew right off. Well, that's quite encouraging. What we've got 20 odd through for the moment. They look like they're tightening up quite nicely. If anything, that group looks marginally, I do mean marginally tighter than the 9015, but there's very little to choose from between these. With pretty much all of the ammos that we've ever used through these, doing sort of side-by-side testing, the difference is pretty much negligible. And considering that we did the test of the 9015 15-20 minutes ago, it does feel like it's a little bit more windy, and I've never been able to directly say, yeah, this one's better than the other one, so they've always been neck and neck, which is pretty good for testing, because we've got common sort of, we know exactly how they're going to perform. We know that when we do a pellet swap that they both take about half a dozen pellets to come onto the new one, so we've got these sort of established baselines. Helps us just rule out some of the pellet fussiness, just work our way through learning how they perform, and when we try new pellets, new slugs, we know already that they've appeared to be leading in quite quickly, so that's pretty good. Let's go and have a look at them. Well, that's a bit of luck, the GoPro's still intact. Right then, XTI. So we started aiming here, we getting a low point of impact, brought it up. So the groups here again, about 10 to 12 millimeters, just under a half inch. One random low one, like we got a bit of a flyer on the other side. Although now looking at these groups, the flyers don't look quite so bad. So one flyer with the XTI group seems to have tightened up. So as you can see, 9015 XTI, largely the same. Now what I need to do is chrono them, and we'll see whether or not that larger or the wider flat section at the rear of these, which I'm hoping is what's centralising these in the barrel a bit better, whether or not that is actually slowing them down more than they ought to be. So let's do it now. Alright, finally got some shots off once I managed to get some charge in the old phone to run the blue shot. So I'll put that up on screen in a moment. We have got 580, 89, what's that, a high of 589 feet per second for a 13 grain slug. I'm not quite sure what that is, I'll work it out, I'll stick it up on the screen in a moment, but that temperature's dropping, so we're going to get home and have a little look, and we'll see what we can what info we can glean from these results. I'll see you at home. Right then guys, we're back. Cool, that temperature's dropping really quick. I was glad to get out of there in the end. Well, first off, are they accurate? Well, yeah, not too bad in the grand scheme of things. We've done slightly better with slugs, and we've done significantly better with a decent pellet. However, looking at some of these groups, British 5p, that's our British standard group measuring gauge. You can see there, this is 17 millimeters across a 5p. These are about 10 to 11 millimeter groups actually. One flyer with the XTI. Now the groups with the 9015 were marginally bigger, only just, but we didn't get any real flyers. That was a sort of flyer, but still just about covered by your 5p. So we got one sort of outlier with the XTI, so pretty much neck and neck in terms of how they shot. The XTI dealt with these heavier slugs better. The sight picture wasn't quite so nice on the 9015 as it was the XTI, so swings and roundabouts in that respect. But the interesting thing, both of the rifles were making about 10 foot-pounds. So you'd expect in most cases that because we have the larger bearing surface on the slug here, so of course the longer slug has the larger bearing surface at the rear than the lighter slugs, but that really does cause quite a significant amount more drag in the barrel itself. At 10 foot-pounds they would perfectly be adequate for pest control work. However, you certainly wouldn't want to be paying this sort of money for decent slugs just for short range rat control or something like that. But we're definitely going to take these out further when the weather allows us and when the fields dry out, because if we get in sort of a sub 5p group at 25, if we can still keep that sub an inch at 50 yards, well, we'll see. We'll really need to test these in the wind. But the interesting thing is that they did run through the sub 12 rifles okay. Sight picture's not too good, but what is amazing, and it sounds quite obvious really, is that of course as the footprint of the slug gets larger in the barrel, of course it's going to sap more power. With us working within our power limits, I can't turn these up really. If I put a JSB heavy through either of these rifles, they're going to be in a nice safe 11.5, 11.6 foot-pounds, so I don't really have any leeway to go up. So yeah, running these under 600 feet per second, certainly not ideal. However, what we need to do when the weather gets better, we'll run them out at range and see what happens, because on paper the ballistic coefficient of these is superior, and if we can actually get anything of a group at 75 yards to 100 yards with them, they should in theory be retaining more energy, actually even leaving the barrel at 10 foot-pounds. They should have retained more of their energy than a JSB heavy leaving the barrel at 11.5. That would have lost more power and more speed on the way down to the target. So quite interesting overall. It was nice to get out because it's been a long old winter really, but it's so wet up the farm. As soon as it dries out a little bit, we're going to go out. We've got a lot more stuff planned. We've got some more barrel testing as well, and at least I've managed to get these 13 grain H&Ns tested before the new barrels go in. So we're going to do some different twist rate comparisons. That's harder to say than you think. We're going to do some different twist rate comparisons with the different barrels, and hopefully now we've got a reasonable ballpark figure to work from. So I'll see you in the next one, guys.